Welcome back to Noir Alley. I'm your host, Eddie Muller. Today we're going to celebrate the birthday of writer-director Richard Brooks by taking a vacation in the Florida Keys. Only this is no pleasure trip. We're going to be held hostage by gangsters in a rickety old hotel as a hurricane heads straight for us. That's the setup for today's film, 1948's Key Largo, scripted by Richard Brooks and directed by John Huston for Warner Brothers. The picture is famous for being the last of 4 films to star Humphrey Bogart and his bride, Lauren Bacall. It's also notable for earning Claire Trevor an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her memorable portrayal of sodden songbird Gay Dawn, a one-time chanteuse, now the moll of gangster Johnny Rocco, played to a fare-thee-well by the great Edward G. Robinson.
Now listen, I don't want any trouble. With you, with anybody.
After soaring to stardom in the 1930s as Little Caesar, Robinson changed up his image in the film noir era, where in pictures like The Woman in the Window, Scarlet Street, The Red House, and Night Has a Thousand Eyes, he played middle-aged men tortured by failure and regret. But here he reverts to type, pulling out all the stops to give Little Caesar a grand encore. At this point in his career, former newspaperman Richard Brooks, born in Philadelphia in 1912 as Reuben Sachs, was an up-and-coming screenwriter. His first film as a Hollywood director was still a couple of years off. Brooks had 2 mentors in Hollywood, newspaperman turned producer Mark Hellinger, for whom he'd written the scripts The Killers and Brute Force, and John Huston, with whom he'd collaborated on the screenplay of The Killers. Huston had been working in Hollywood since the early 30s, so he treated Brooks like his protege, even though there was only a 6-year age difference between the two. Huston invited Brooks to Key Largo, Florida, to help him adapt Maxwell Anderson's 1939 play into a vehicle for Bogart and Bacall. Now, in truth, Brooks did the yeoman's share of the work. Huston spent most of his time fishing during the day and gambling the night away in the casino of the Largo Hotel. Brooks would later say that thanks to Huston's influence, he dropped at the gaming tables more than he was paid to work on the script. Now, even without the drinking and gambling, adapting the play was no easy chore. On stage, the first half of Key Largo takes place in the hills of Andalusia during the Spanish Civil War, as American soldiers in the Lincoln Brigade, fighting against the forces of Generalissimo Francisco Franco, engage in long existential discussions about life and war and the necessity of battling totalitarian regimes. Now, one of these soldiers deserts his comrades to reappear in the play's second act in Key Largo, where he seeks forgiveness from the fiancée of a comrade he left for dead in Spain. And yes, there is a gangster, based on Lucky Luciano, who figures in the destiny of the guilt-ridden soldier. Huston abandoned the play's entire first act and updated the second half to contemporary post-World War II America. Bogart's Frank McCloud is now a valiant but cynical war veteran visiting his fallen comrade's wife out of a sense of duty. She runs a ramshackle hotel with her crippled father-in-law, played by Lionel Barrymore. Huston wanted to tone down the politics from the play, but Brooks, who always had his finger on topical hot buttons, preserved the anti-fascist thrust of the story, making Johnny Rocco a symbolic stand-in for strong-armed dictators who lord it over common, hard-working people. Now, although the script was drafted in Key Largo with some filming done there, all the interiors were shot on sets at the Warner Studio in Burbank. Now, Brooks may have gambled away the dough he made writing the picture, but he'd gain invaluable experience when Huston, who knew his protege was eager to direct, allowed him to stay on set for the entire production, a luxury rarely afforded writers, then or now. Featuring terrific camera work by the great German cinematographer Karl Freund, with a score by Max Steiner, here is the 4th and final film in the Bogart-Bacall quartet, one many feel is the best of the bunch. From John Huston and Richard Brooks, who would have been 107 years old today, here is Key Largo. One of the major problems that confronted writer Richard Brooks when he adapted Maxwell Anderson's play for the screen was its climax. The play's stage-bound conclusion was, shall we say, less than cinematic. Huston wanted to open up the action, take it from the hotel right into the storm, and give Frank McCloud a heroic finale befitting a star of Bogart's stature. Well, he found the solution in a novel by another notable writer, Ernest Hemingway. Huston had Brooks graft the climax of Hemingway's novel To Have and Have Not onto Key Largo's final act. Clever idea, since Warner Brothers already owned the rights to the novel, which of course was the basis for the first film to feature Bogart and Bacall back in 1944. What Huston didn't know was that the novel would be brought to the screen again the following year by Warner's, with John Garfield as boat jockey Harry Morgan turning the tables on a crew of crooks he's supposed to ferry to safety. Now, the ending of this film might not have taken audiences by surprise, but there's certainly one scene that made moviegoers gasp. By 1948, audiences had become used to seeing Lionel Barrymore in a wheelchair. The veteran actor, John Barrymore's older brother, had been a fixture on stage and screen for decades. But by the late 1930s, a serious hip injury, coupled with severe arthritis, confined him to a wheelchair, in which he played his most famous roles, Dr. Gillespie in the long-running Dr. Kildare film series, and the evil Mr. Potter in Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life. For audiences in 1948, the most shocking moment in Key Largo was when Barrymore collapses after struggling out of his wheelchair trying to get at Johnny Rocco. Claire Trevor's pathetic rendition of Moanin' Low is another memorable scene. She once confided to me that she was terrified of singing on camera. The crew was coming back from lunch when Trevor asked Huston when she'd get to rehearse the number in the music department. "You don't," he said. "We're shooting it right now." Trevor had figured she'd have a singer dubbing her, but Huston knew her very real anxiety would give the scene an extra edge. It ended up winning her an Oscar.
Moaning low, my sweet man, I love him so.
Okay, here's a quiz. Which performer in today's film would end up making the most dough in Hollywood? Well, Claire Trevor made out like a bandit when she married real estate developer Milton Bren, who built most of Orange County. And Lauren Bacall certainly did all right for herself, although she continued working right up till the end. But nobody did as well as Harry Lewis, who played Rocco's henchman, Toots Bass. Lewis was a bit player in dozens of pictures, but in 1950, he and his wife Marilyn borrowed $5,000 to open up a hamburger joint on Sunset Boulevard, which became a favorite of local celebrities and regular folks. The Hamburger Hamlet grew into a thriving chain, which the Lewises finally sold in 1987 for $33 million. And just to show you that everything that goes around comes around, a new stage version of Key Largo will be premiering this year at the Geffen Theater in Los Angeles, based on the movie, not the original play. Veteran screen actor Andy Garcia will play the role made famous by Edward G. Robinson. Now, if you've got ideas about who'd be good in the other roles, tell us about it on the Noir Alley Facebook page and Twitter feed. Just don't expect a producing credit if you happen to guess right. And Humphrey Bogart will be back next week, and he'll still be in Florida, where he goes hunting for the killers of his paratrooper pal in 1947's Dead Reckoning, co-starring Elizabeth Scott. She plays, you guessed it, a husky-voiced chanteuse, who may or may not be a femme fatale. And here's a final birthday shout-out to the late Richard Brooks, writer and director of dozens of great films, including Deadline USA, Blackboard Jungle, Elmer Gantry, Lord Jim, The Professionals, In Cold Blood, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, and many more. It was a hell of a career. And now I'm going to go hoist one in your honor, Mr. Brooks. Cheers.